Another special type of address is the local loopback address, which is very useful for testing. A device can send a message to itself, and this helps verify or make sure that the TCP/IP stack is installed correctly on that machine. A typical loopback IP address is 127.0.0.1. But remember please that anything in the 127 range is deemed a loopback address. This is often seen as one of the big mistakes by the designers of IP version 4. A 127 address is a Class A address. Class A addresses have 16 million odd host addresses, and by choosing this address range for the loopback address, we lost the use of potentially 16 million IP addresses. Those addresses cannot be allocated as public IP addresses on the internet, thus making the IP version 4 address space smaller than it may have been. In IP version 6, a different address is used for the loopback, ::1, and they made sure that they didn't make the same mistake again. So here's an example. I can type ipconfig on my PC, and this will give me the IP address of my machine. In this example, it's 10.0.0.6. That's the local IP version 4 address on my PC. So I could ping 10.0.0.6, and as you can see, the ping succeeds. I can also, however, ping my loopback address. So I could ping 127.0.0.1, and notice the ping also succeeds. But don't forget, anything in this range is supported. So 127.127.127.127 is also a loopback address. What about 127.1.2.3? It also works. So anything in the range 127.x.x.x is also a loopback address, and any one of those addresses could be used to test the TCP/IP stack. Now this machine has both IP version 4 and IP version 6 installed. So here's my PC's IP version 6 address. So I could ping 2001:20::2, which is my local PC's IP address, but I could also ping ::1, which is my IP version 6 loopback address. Now this video doesn't discuss IP version 6 in any detail, but it's worth pointing out that we have both an IP version 4 loopback, such as 127.0.0.1, as well as an IP version 6 loopback, such as ::1. IP version 6 addresses are not wasted, or to be more politically correct, IP version 6 addresses are optimized more than they are in IP version 4. Please also note that routers and switches also have loopback addresses, and that's not the same concept as the loopback address that we're discussing here. So be aware that in the field, or in the real world, engineers will often refer to a router's loopback address, and that's not the same as what we're discussing here. You've got the local loopback, which is the Class A address, 127.0.0.1, but routers and switches can also be configured with valid IP addresses on what's called a loopback interface. So a router or switch may have a loopback interface, such as interface loopback 0, configured with an IP address of 10.1.1.1/32. So in other words, we have a Class A address, 10.1.1.1, with a /32 mask configured on a loopback interface. But network engineers may refer to the router's loopback IP address, and they are referring to this IP address and not 127.0.0.1. I will explain, as I've mentioned in a moment, what a network mask does, but what I'd like to point out here is that routers and switches have separate loopback addresses which are different to the local loopback address that we're discussing now. Routers and switches do support the loopback address of 127.x.x.x, which allows us to verify the TCP/IP stack, but loopback interfaces on routers and switches are very useful for other things and are used by routing protocols such as OSPF.